If you took your most beloved game, but then changed every system, reworked every mechanic, smoothed down every sharp edge you could find, and then painted over the whole thing with the finest graphics.jpg the world has ever seen, do you still have the same game? Well, that's the question I went into the RS3 League looking to answer. I know, right? RS creator tries RS3 via a limited time game mode and then makes a video about it? Whatever will he think of next? I just wanted to see what it was all about and give a long-time old-school player's perspective on it all. And hey, a special mode with massively boosted XP rates and OP relics seems like a great way to test out a wide range of RS3 content quickly. I went into it with the same biases I imagine most OS players did. I kept expecting to run into some sort of fundamental, base-level, core game design type issue that made RS3 completely unplayable. And yet, it just never came. Now granted, two of RS3's most complained about issues, those being microtransactions and the so-called daily scape, more on those later, are not really present in a league, so we must bear that in mind. But at its core, RS3 as a game is totally fine. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with it. I know that's going to be a controversial statement to some, but I am supremely confident that almost everyone who disagrees on this hasn't touched RS3 in years and is stuck in the same mentality we had back in 2013. Don't get me wrong, RS3 took RuneScape in a direction that I wouldn't have chosen either, but its biggest crime was what it replaced. When there was only one RuneScape, that one version was under a lot of pressure to be everything for everyone all at once. Every addition you make risks being a subtraction for someone else. You can't go in multiple directions at once. They had to pick a lane, and yes, most of us decided that they picked that lane wrong. That's why OSRS got made. But we have old school now. RS3 is under no obligation to be the version of RuneScape anymore. It is allowed to be different. Why would we make the same game twice? A huge amount of the hate for it seems to stem from the fact that it's not old school. But why would you want it to be? Old school already exists. So, what are those differences? Well, the first one everyone always brings up is the evolution of combat. The worst thing to ever happen to a video game ever, bar none, send tweet. Yes, when this came out, it really sucked. But that was 13 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I remember it being annoying busy work you had to tack on top of any combat you were doing, lest you lose a huge chunk of DPS, and I remember any monster with a reasonable defense being almost impossible to hit. Well, both of these issues are gone now. You can just choose not to worry about the abilities at all now, really. Just set up a hotbar and let the game use them for you. At that point, it basically becomes old school combat with fancier animations. But the option is still there to engage with it for better results, if you want to. From an old school perspective, it's like having access to a bunch of different spec weapons all at once that you can choose between depending on the situation you're in. You have AoE attacks like a Din's Bulwark spec to hit everything around you, which, by the way, are extra nice here as everywhere is a multi-combat area, so you always get to use it. You also have multi-hit power attacks like a Dragon Claw spec to shred a single target when you want that. And then you even have your stun abilities like a Dragon Spear spec. It's mostly stuff we also have on our side, just much more available and ready on demand. You get to feel really powerful having access to all this cool shit all the time, all at once. It's not all that bad a system, just a different way of moving the same pieces and with much flashier aesthetics. Now, the changes to accuracy and defense are substantially different, and they're pretty interesting. Basically, unlike in OSRS, where sometimes you hit and sometimes you don't, in RS3, accuracy is just another aspect of your overall damage calculation. You always hit, but your accuracy and your strength are both part of that hit's size. It certainly makes combat a bit more satisfying, especially at the lower levels when your accuracy is low. You're no longer hitting 3 zeros in a row on the local cows. Every swing you take is progressing you towards the end of the fight. It's an interesting take on the idea, and I gotta respect RS3 for being willing to do things so differently and move away from what's always been. That's a running theme for a lot of the differences we'll go through, and sometimes can be old school's Achilles heel. We just refuse to ever let anything ever change sometimes, even when it sucks. Which is a great time to talk about the mining and smithing rework. Unlike in old school, where mining anything above iron ore is agonizingly painful and smithing your own gear is nothing but a meme, RS3 had the balls to wipe out the entire previous system and make a new one. And it's pretty good. I was able to keep my mining, smithing and melee combat stats all in alignment and upgrade my own gear as we went. Yes, even Runite gear and far beyond that. It's really cool to run around in gear you made yourself from scratch, rather than OSRS's weird patchwork of buying from shops and relying on monster drops. These things still exist, you can still do that, but the option of making it yourself is always there, meaning mining and smithing have some actual use to them rather than being the mostly dead content they are in our world. And old school players being the way that we are, this will probably never change. Now, we can argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there's no denying how confusing it is for someone just starting out. You go through Tutorial Island, make your own bronze dagger, and then once you get to the mainland you find out that you will never go through that loop again, and all that stuff you learned is thrown to the wind because shitty level 30 gear requires 88 smithing to be made. That's 328 times more experience. What an absolute joke. So yes, I have to give the point to RS3 on this one. They have actually made mining and smithing into useful skills, because they weren't afraid to admit that some of RuneScape's original design is pretty bad actually. We don't have to pretend that it's some perfect game passed down from the gods, like any change to it would be an affront to their holy desires. Some of it is bad, so let's try and change it. It doesn't always work out for them, but this one did. RS3, well done. Though they did accidentally turn mining into woodcutting in the process, and in fact in RS3 almost all skilling feels like woodcutting. Let me explain what I mean. One of RuneScape's best qualities is how you have a wide range of options available to you on how you want to engage with it on any given day. On the lowest end of the effort spectrum, you have stuff like chopping magic trees or combat training AFK at rock crabs. You don't have to click very often and you get lesser rewards, but you are still progressing. At the extreme other end of the spectrum, you could instead try and get much faster and better rewards by putting in much more effort, doing stuff like 2-tick teaks or going to fight some high-level boss for high-value loot, and of course, everything in between. There's also this naturally different feeling to each of the skills in the game due to their different needs in effort and attention. Agility, for example, requires constant attention to make progress in. You cannot AFK agility, not through any intentional means at least. This gives agility a sort of prestige among the player base. Since it takes so much more effort to train, an agility skill cape is considered much more valuable than a woodcutting one. But RS3 seems to have thrown most of this away. From my time with it, almost all of my skilling was through low intensity click and wait style activities, just like woodcutting would be. To train mining now, you click once and mine infinitely, re-clicking occasionally to bring your speed back up. To smith, you choose an item and wait, sometimes for ages, for it to be finished. Re-clicking occasionally to bring your speed back up. And when I tried some of the new skills like divination and archaeology, they also had this click and wait training style. You click and you wait and you wait and you click. Runecrafting has the rune span now, thieving has auto pickpocketing, even agility has these serenity post things for AFK agility gains. It all comes together to make it feel like RS3 is intended to be a second monitor game most of the time. Don't get me wrong, I put my OSRS to the side all the time and watch a movie or whatever, but there's usually a good option I can switch to when I want to make it my main activity, and a lot of RS3 skilling doesn't seem to have that option, though it's possible I missed it, there's still plenty of the game I haven't seen. But there is a clear difference in skilling philosophy between the two games. RS3 seems to be much more on board with the idle game side of things, letting you make pretty big gains from a single click every 5 minutes. We all love a bit of AFK training, but at some point it does seem a bit excessive. If you AFK everything, are you really even playing the game anymore? Or just waiting for it to finish? I could definitely see this approach being more appealing to a more casual demographic though, and it's one of what I feel gives RS3 such a different texture to old school. Speaking of textures, let's talk graphics. This is the one you're going to get hit in the face with straight away when you boot up RS3. It certainly doesn't look like your childhood game anymore. It looks like a modern game with all the fancy bells and whistles you'd expect. With higher poly models, high quality textures, dynamic lighting and shadows, coloured lighting, really long draw distances, and we could go on with this all day. It's very pretty. Obviously, deciding which you like better is a totally subjective choice, but there are, I think, some objective points to be made in here. When you take strides to improve the graphical quality of your game, and when I say quality here, I'm talking about increases in graphical technology, more pixels, the number side of things. Every increase in this quality tends to come at the cost of performance. It was really jarring the first time I got hit with a loading screen in RS3. Switching between areas in this game feels so sluggish compared to old school, where it's near instant most of the time. One of the worst offenders was when I was trying to train agility at the Wildy course. Every time I failed this obstacle, I'm hit with a sudden loading screen jump scare. It feels awful, but there's not really anything they can do about it. All those textures and models need to load in somehow. The other big thing that holds the graphics back a lot is how wildly juxtaposed a lot of content is when it's next to each other. living in the same game space with different art styles or levels of detail. The example everyone knows is Zanuck from the Dorgeshun questline. These three models are the same character in the same game, and yet they all look like they're from entirely different franchises. This problem shows up everywhere. It's incredibly obvious when you walk into an area that hasn't been touched in over a decade. With all of its old low-poly models and limited colour palette and weird geometry, it feels really off-putting and uncanny. Like you've stepped into something a bit wrong and you shouldn't be there. Like, look at the contrast between my player character and this infernal mage who hasn't been updated since 2008. My guy has fingers, but he sure as hell doesn't. And those eyes, oh, are you okay, mate? Now, old school does have a bit of this to a lesser extent. Compare an old area like the Khazad fight arena to something new like Varlamore. There is still a clear contrast in the level of detail, but it's much less of an issue because the clear effort is being made to keep them matching the same art style and to roughly the same level of graphics technology. Like, my player character is using the same model from like 2004, but he doesn't look out of place in either location. This stuff might not bother some people, but to me, it really feels quite sad in RS3, seeing just how much old and forgotten content has been left to rot in the background of this game. But that's kind of impossible to not have happen when you have a game with 2 decades worth of content in it and more being added all the time. And when you have that much content being added with little care for complexity creep, well, you get item bloat. A quick search on the wiki shows that RS3 has over 25,000 items in the game. That's an insane number to think about. In my short time playing for the League, I've accumulated a total of 862 of those items into my collection. And I still don't know what a lot of them even do. Like, what even is a tiny spiky iron salvage, or an enhanced chronicle fragment? Goblin Cower Shield? Soapstone, Congealed Blood, Penguin Spider Vice, Eye of Dagon, Memoriam Crystal 14, Deployable Herb Burner, Costume Skipping Ticket, Scrimshaw, and what the hell is an Orgone?
Orgones.
And yes, of course, I know, I can go and look up each of these items on the wiki and try and figure out what they're all used for, but it's a lot of mental burden to be putting on new players who aren't familiar with all this stuff. Even if I do go and look up what an Orgone is, the info on that wiki page is only as useful as my knowledge of each of the hyperlinked words. To understand what an Orgone is, I need to know what archaeology is and how its materials work. Not a Herculean task on its own, but multiply this 800 times over and it starts to get very mentally taxing. You're wading through this swamp of information with new stuff being thrown at you all the time like fistfuls of spaghetti. Plus, the whole time you have no way of knowing if this new thing you're looking into is actually a useful feature or some worthless dead content that no one has touched in years. And we have a lot of dead content floating around. Unless you are someone who lives for memorizing new video game items, it's pretty expected that you're going to mentally check out from this at some point. But then you're left always wondering if you're missing out on something. If there's some boost or benefit you should be taking advantage of that would be giving you greater rewards if you just knew it existed. You can make the argument that you don't have to use all these boosts all the time, but optimizing your gameplay is a key factor in how these games work. Here's a task that will take you 20 hours to complete. Go and figure out how to complete it in 15. That's the fun of these games, always figuring out how to do things better. But when you have so many systems and items to keep track of and learn about and actually remember to take out of the bank with you when you go out, it all gets very draining. Unless you're someone who's already very used to it all and knows which parts are and aren't relevant. I think this hits on a core issue with designing for any 20-year-old game. This isn't just an RS3 thing. The average update is going to be designed for someone who is already deeply embedded in your game and culture. They only have to learn the one new thing because they already know the 20,000 other things in the game. But you've now made that 20,000 long list into 20,001. Every update just makes the game more and more daunting for a new player to join and raises that barrier to entry just a little bit higher. OSRS certainly has this problem to some extent too. We have nearly 12,000 items of our own. The only difference being that I am one of those embedded players, so it's easy for me to know what they all do. But diving headfirst into RS3 with no guides or friends to help me really gave me an appreciation for how much work we're expecting newbies to do to start enjoying our games. And I don't really know what we can do about it. We have to be able to add new items to make new stuff. Updates have to keep coming. The game must grow. We can reuse existing items wherever possible and find ways to better tutorialize and explain things in some places, but at the end of the day, there will always be a lot for a new player to learn before they can start playing properly. And on the hierarchy of difficult to get into games, our escapes are pretty up there. And so we loop back to the premise at the start, the clickbait title that drew you all in the first place. Is RS3 still a RuneScape after all these years? And when we compare it to our beloved old school darling, the only answer I can give you is, well, yeah. Like, yeah, they do some things differently to how we're used to, but a lot of the differences I bring up aren't that big of a deal when it comes down to it. Even the evolution of combat with all of its fancy animations and action bars can still be played as RuneScape's classic click and wait with occasional special attacks. Even a lot of the issues aren't unique to RS3 either. Dead content? Yep, old school's got plenty of that. A difficult to get into new player experience? Yep, we have that too. There isn't that much about RS3 that is so fundamentally different and wrong when compared to old school. With the big exception of microtransactions and dailyscape. I told you we'd come back to these, and they've been hanging around in the background ever since. The enormous ghostly elephants that haunt any discussion of RS3's quality. It would be unfair of me to praise RS3 without mentioning these two demons. I didn't bring them up before because they didn't come into my gameplay experience during the league, but that's the whole point. The whole reason I even tried the league in the first place was because I knew these two dickheads wouldn't be a factor during the league. Anyone who knows anything about RS3 knows this deadly duo, and anyone signing up to start a new character here is doing so knowing that they're going to have to avoid or ignore these two bastards the whole time they're playing. Microtransactions suck for obvious reasons. They suck at every game they're in. They're horribly predatory to players with weak impulse control, they've ruined the prestige of cool cosmetic items, and they force players to be advertised to all the time in a video game they often already paid for. I don't need to say any more on these, everyone already knows why they suck. Dailyscape is a bit more insidious though. Dailyscape refers to the sheer number of daily, weekly, or any other time-gated content that RS3 is full of. A more general way to say it is FOMO, fear of missing out. These time-limited events create an unhealthy and often tedious and boring gameplay pattern, where you feel the need to go through your daily list of chores every time you log on before you can start playing properly. And they even make you feel forced to log on to do your dailies on days that you didn't even feel like playing at all. Sure, you could skip a few days, but a lot of these things have items that can only be obtained there, so you're just delaying your long wait even more any day that you miss. Or they give massive XP drops for very little time investment, so you'd be a fool to not cash in on those whenever you can. These ones have a bad tendency to warp your perception on XP rates as well. It feels really lame to go back to a normal agility course after getting 2k experience drops from a single click at the circus. You get tempted to just not bother training the skill properly at all, and just let all those weekly visits stack up for you while you do something else. You also have these fairly constant events going off all the time. If you ever wanted to get the rewards from these, you better be ready to drop whatever you're doing at a moment's notice to go and jump in on them. You don't want to be missing out after all. In my short league's journey, I encountered fish flingers, Balthazar's circus, building god statues, strange rocks, demon flash mobs, Guthix caches, the pit, goblin raids, player-owned farms, Anachronia base camp management, and penguin hide and goddamn sea. And these are only a selection of the time-gated activities you have to look forward to in your RS3 journey. It would be totally fine if there was only a few of these things, but there are just so many now that the idea of getting into RS3 properly feels like signing up to a list of daily chores. It's very reminiscent of a dishonest mobile game or a battle pass. Whoosh. I don't think it was at all intentional for it to go this way, just a long series of individual decisions with poor foresight. Or maybe just a totally different design philosophy that doesn't jive with me. Either way, dailyscape is something you really have to come to terms with if you want to start playing RS3. I think that's unavoidable and a bit of a shame. I felt the need to go into these two big issues because I thought about them a lot when I was deciding whether or not I was going to start playing RS3 for real after the league. I came into this looking to see if there was any RuneScape still left in there, and I found a lot more than I expected. At its core, RuneScape 3 is still RuneScape. It's like a childhood friend you haven't seen since you were 12. They have a wife and a kid and 3 piercings and ride a motorcycle now, but it's still them deep down. You can still joke about farts together and it feels like you're kids again. Sure, RS3 is different to how RuneScape used to be, but so is old school. Like, tell me, when's the last time you mined Rune Essence on your OSRS account? What was peak in 2004 isn't anymore, and that's fine. RS3, for all of its flaws, is a deep game with a rich history, a huge amount of lore and world building and stories to tell, and a quest where you turn into a duck. It's different because it wanted to be different. It wanted to stay relevant in an evolving world of ever-improving graphical fidelity and ever more fierce competition. It didn't change to spite you, it just wanted to be played, and to make money at the same time, like every other game under the sun. Sure, they drop the ball sometimes, but are we going to hold that against them forever? What I'm trying to say after all that is that RS3 is a pretty good game actually, and if you haven't given it a chance after all these years, well, maybe you should. You might just enjoy it. If you've gotten burnt out of RS recently and are looking for another RuneScape type experience to dive into, then you could do a hell of a lot worse than RS3. It is worth your time if you're willing to look past its issues, just like any game on the market today. There isn't a single game I play that doesn't have a list of annoyances I wish I could fix. That's part of playing video games in the big 2025 and watching wannabe YouTubers make video essays on them. You have to be willing to compromise. That's normal now and kind of always has been. To my RS3 brothers, sisters, and non-binary brethren, I do hope things get better for you in the near future, because you and your game do deserve better than how you've been treated for the last few years. Maybe this influx of new attention will encourage the suits to stop treating RS3 as some dying cash cow to milk for all it's worth before it keels over for good. Oh, and on that subject, bring pride back, you cowards. Don't think I've forgotten about that, Bellamy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this old school boomer's journey into the new school world. To bring it all back to the start again, yes, RS3 is still RuneScape, and RuneScape is still good. Peace.